Imagine a country deciding it's time to build its very first serious turboprop, not for training flights, but to challenge some of the most trusted business aircraft in the world. Fast, ambitious, and surprisingly affordable, the CAIGA Primus 150 wasn't just another airplane project, it was a statement. And once you understand how this aircraft came to be, the story gets far more interesting than the specs. The story of China's first serious turboprop doesn't actually begin in China. It starts thousands of miles away in the United States with a sleek experimental aircraft called the AVIC LT. The AVIC was fast, modern, and ambitious, the kind of airplane that made pilots smile and accountants slightly nervous. Built largely from composite materials and designed for speed, it looked like a glimpse into the future of personal aviation. Then reality stepped in. The company behind it ran into financial trouble, and suddenly, this promising aircraft found itself looking for a second chance. That's where China enters the story. China Aviation Industry, General Aircraft, better known as CAIGA, saw something in the design that others had overlooked. Instead of letting it fade into aviation history, they acquired the rights and decided to evolve it into something far more significant. China's first homegrown executive turboprop. You can imagine the weight behind that decision. This wasn't just another airplane project, it was a statement of intent. At the time, China was expanding rapidly in aviation manufacturing, but mostly by supporting larger programs or producing components. Creating an entirely new business aircraft meant stepping into a market dominated by trusted names like Pilatus and Daha. That's like entering a championship race where everyone else already knows the track. Engineers reworked the design, adapting it to meet new goals and certification paths. The aircraft eventually became known as the CAIGA Primus 150, later referred to as the AVIC Leadair AG300. It promised modern performance, executive comfort, and perhaps most importantly, a price that could challenge established rivals. And here's the interesting part. From the very beginning, this airplane wasn't just about speed or luxury. It was about proving that China could build something entirely its own, which raises a bigger question. What exactly were they trying to compete with, and how bold was that ambition really? Once the Primus 150 project moved into development, the goal became very clear very quickly. This wasn't meant to be a domestic experiment. It was built to compete on a global stage, right alongside aircraft that already dominated the executive turboprop market. Think about the names involved. The Pilatus PC-12, trusted for reliability and versatility. The Daha TBM, famous for speed and efficiency. These weren't just competitors, they were aircraft with decades of real-world reputation behind them. And yet, CAIGA looked at this lineup and decided its first homegrown turboprop would go straight into the same conversation. The strategy was clever. Instead of trying to beat everyone at everything, the Primus 150 aimed to combine modern performance with a much lower purchase price. Early estimates suggested pricing around $1.5 to $2 million, significantly lower than many established rivals. In aviation terms, that's like offering a luxury hotel room at economy prices. People immediately want to know what the catch is. The aircraft was designed as a pressurized, single-engine executive turboprop with a sleek composite airframe and clean aerodynamic lines. It wasn't trying to be a rough-field utility hauler like some turboprops. This was clearly aimed at business travelers who wanted speed, style, and efficiency without stepping up to jet costs. There was also a bigger picture here. China's general aviation industry was growing rapidly, and having a domestic executive aircraft meant reducing reliance on imported designs. The Primus 150 represented both a commercial opportunity and a symbol of technological confidence. Of course, ambition is one thing. Delivering performance that matches the promise is another entirely. Because once an aircraft enters flight testing, numbers stop being marketing claims and start becoming reality. And that's where the Primus 150's story takes a more interesting turn, because the specs sounded almost too good to ignore. And if you're enjoying this story so far, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Would you trust a brand new turboprop from a newcomer or stick with the proven names? Now onto the interesting part. On paper, the Primus 150 looked like it was trying to skip a few steps in the usual aviation hierarchy. For a first-time homegrown turboprop, the numbers were surprisingly ambitious, the kind that make pilots lean in a little closer when they hear them. Power comes from a General Electric H85 turboprop engine, producing around 850 horsepower. That's serious power for a single-engine business aircraft, and it was paired with a lightweight composite airframe designed to squeeze every bit of efficiency out of the airflow. The projected cruise speed hovered around 324 knots, roughly 370 miles per hour. For comparison, that's fast enough that passengers unfamiliar with aviation might assume they're on a small jet, right up until the propeller noise reminds them otherwise. Range was advertised around 1,350 nautical miles, meaning the aircraft could comfortably handle long regional trips without frequent fuel stops. Climb performance aimed to take it well above weather and turbulence, giving it the smooth ride expected in executive travel. The cabin, designed for around 5 occupants, was pressurized and intended to feel more like a business traveler's tool than a weekend hobby aircraft. And this is where the story gets interesting. On paper, the Primus 150 seemed to offer a blend of speed and affordability that sounded almost too convenient. The kind of airplane that makes you wonder if someone forgot to add a zero to the price tag. But as every aviation enthusiast knows, specs are promises, and promises have to survive flight testing. Wind tunnels and spreadsheets don't always agree with reality once wheels leave the ground. The aircraft's first flights generated excitement, but they also started revealing the real challenge of bringing a brand new turboprop to market. Because this is the moment when engineering dreams meet physics, and physics tends to have the final word. The Primus 150 took to the skies for its first flight in 2014, and for a moment, everything felt possible. The aircraft looked fast, modern, and confident in the air, exactly the image you want when launching your country's first executive turboprop. Industry observers started paying closer attention, and early interest suggested that buyers were curious to see if the airplane could deliver on its promises. But aviation has a way of humbling even the best ideas. Flight testing is where an aircraft stops being a concept and starts becoming real. Numbers that looked perfect on paper suddenly meet turbulence, hot weather, crosswinds, and all the little variables that engineers can't fully predict in simulations. Some performance targets shifted as testing continued, and timelines naturally stretched, something so common in aviation that pilots almost expect it. This phase also revealed the complexity of certification. Competing with aircraft like the PC-12 and TBM doesn't just mean matching speed or range. It means proving reliability, safety, and long-term viability. That takes time, and patience isn't always easy when expectations are high. There's a quiet irony here. The Primus 150 was designed to feel modern and forward-looking, but the process of proving it was old-fashioned aviation at its core, slow, methodical, and sometimes frustrating. Still, the project moving forward at all was significant. Each test flight represented more than data points. It represented progress toward a bigger goal, proving that China could develop an executive aircraft capable of standing beside established Western competitors. And this is where the story shifts again, because once you see the challenges of bringing a new aircraft to life, you start asking a different question. How exactly did this newcomer stack up against the giants it was designed to challenge? By the time the Primus 150 entered testing, comparisons were inevitable. Every discussion quickly turned into the same question: how does this new aircraft stack up against the names pilots already trust? The Pilatus PC-12 is famous for being the Swiss Army knife of aviation, rugged, reliable, capable of carrying people or cargo into places that barely qualify as airports. The Daher TBM, meanwhile, built its reputation on speed, often described as the turboprop for people who secretly wanted a jet. These aircraft didn't just have strong specs, they had years of real-world stories behind them. The Primus 150 aimed to sit somewhere between those two worlds. It promised modern composite construction, competitive cruise speeds around the low 300-knot range, and a pressurized cabin designed for executive comfort. On paper, it looked like a sensible alternative for buyers who wanted performance without paying premium Western prices. And here's where things get interesting. The biggest difference wasn't necessarily performance, it was perception. Established brands come with global support networks, training programs, and resale confidence. Buyers know what they're getting. The Primus 150, being new, had to prove not just that it could fly fast, but that it could build trust. Imagine choosing between a familiar brand you've seen everywhere and something new that promises similar results for less money. Even if the math makes sense, your instincts might hesitate. That's the challenge every newcomer faces in aviation. It's not enough to be good, you have to be proven. And yet, the Primus 150 was never just about beating competitors on a spreadsheet. The bigger story was what it represented for China's growing aviation ambitions. Because sometimes, an airplane's true importance isn't measured by sales numbers, but by what it signals for the future. By this point, it would be easy to judge the Primus 150 purely by performance charts or certification timelines. But that misses the bigger picture entirely. The real story isn't just about whether it beats a PC-12 or matches a TBM. It's about what it represents. For China's aviation industry, the Primus 150 marked a shift from participating in global programs to trying to lead one. Building a turboprop might sound modest compared to airliners or fighter jets. In many ways, it's harder. Business aircraft demand polish, efficiency, and trust. Owners expect them to work flawlessly, often with little tolerance for surprises. Getting into that market is like walking onto a stage where the audience already knows exactly what good looks like. The Primus 150 was an attempt to prove that a new player could enter that space. Even if the program faced delays or evolving goals, the fact that it flew at all signaled ambition. It showed intent, and in aviation, intent usually comes long before dominance. There's also a subtle irony here. The aircraft began life as an American concept, evolved through Chinese development, and aimed at a global market. It became a symbol of how interconnected modern aviation has become. Innovation rarely belongs to one country anymore. It travels, adapts, and reappears in unexpected places. And for pilots watching from the sidelines, the Primus 150 represented something familiar: the excitement of seeing a newcomer try to challenge established giants. Not every first attempt becomes a runaway success, but almost every major aviation story starts with someone willing to try anyway. Which leaves us with the most interesting question of all: what happens next? Because the first turboprop is rarely the last, and the lessons learned here could shape aircraft we haven't even seen yet. The story of the Primus 150 isn't really about a single airplane reaching perfection. It's about momentum. Every test flight, every redesign, and every lesson learned feeds into something bigger, the foundation of a growing general aviation industry that wants to compete globally. Even if this aircraft never floods airports the way its rivals have, it proved that China was willing to step into a market where trust is earned slowly and competition is fierce. That alone changes the landscape. And for aviation fans, there's something enjoyable about watching an underdog attempt something bold. Sometimes first-generation aircraft are rough around the edges, but they often inspire the machines that come next. So maybe the Primus 150 isn't the final destination. Maybe it's the first chapter, the airplane that opened the door for whatever follows. Because in aviation, history rarely remembers who played it safe. It remembers who tried to push forward first.